Joe Biden taking a bit of a victory lap on a deal that he wasn't involved in, but it is significant and it's part of the agenda that he came into office, and so he's going to take the W on it. This is the climate deal that was struck last night by Senators Chuck Schumer, Democratic leader in the Senate, and Senator Joe Manchin, who's been the key vote in the Senate on so many issues. It's a deal that the president said incorporated a lot of the proposals that he originally had in the Build Back Better proposal that he had that went nowhere. And this is a deal that focuses on climate and on health care as well. They're calling it the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 because it does raise taxes on corporations, on IRS enforcement and other issues. But the bill will allow Medicare to negotiate prescription drug prices. That's very important to people on Medicare. And it will cap the annual amount of expenditures on prescription drugs at $2,000 per year for people on Medicare. And for a lot of people, that's going to make a big difference. There's some climate and energy issues in it as well. And the president taking a victory lap on that, as well as the CHIPS bill, which has to do with technology. And at the very end, he acknowledged the elephant in the room, which is that the economy now has shrunk 2 quarters in a row. And that is a technical one way of describing a recession. The president said that the country's not in a recession. So he's taking a victory lap, and he's also fighting some political battles here. So let's bring in ABC News White House correspondent Mary Alice Parks and ABC News business reporter Alexis Christophers. So Mary Alice, first, this is not a deal, this big deal, $396 billion bill. It's a big bill that the president was involved in, but he's declaring victory.
Yeah, he wants to see this done. You heard a lot of this speech was really a push to Congress to pass this, to pass it immediately. You know, Democrats have no room for error on this one. They would need all 50 Democrats to stick together. Joe Manchin has been the senator that's so often walked away from these negotiations, but there are other senators that could still throw a wrench in things. He seemed confident, though. You could hear he wanted to sort of, like you said, take the W. He seems like ready to celebrate, kind of on the cusp. And you're right, he has not been involved. His team has sort of made a point of saying that he's not been involved in the day-to-day negotiations, but still, this bill really gets at a lot of what he was pushing for, has been pushing for since he first came into office.
And Alexis, the elephant in the room, as I say, is it a recession or not? So the GDP, the measure of the economy's output, fell in the second quarter. That is a strong sign that a recession is imminent or already here. What's the judgment on that? The president says, hold off. We're not in a recession. Who's right?
Right. And then, of course, Republicans say we are. We had Congressman McCarthy earlier today on the House floor declare that there is a recession. So in many ways, it sort of feels like the tale of two economies right now. But really, the true arbiter of announcing a formal recession is the National Bureau of Economic Research. They're an academic group, and they look at a whole bunch of things before they say, yes, we're in a recession. One of them is the job market. And the president just talked about that strong job market that we have, touting the lowest unemployment rate in half a century at 3.6%, almost where it was pre-pandemic. Actually, pre-pandemic unemployment was at 3.5%. So we are right there back to nearly full employment. So if we are in a recession, Terry, it's a rather strange one because you usually don't see a recession with so many people working and with wages going up.
You know, Mary Alice, I want to ask about this deal, $369 billion for climate. There's the health care stuff in there as well. It's not $2 trillion, but it's getting up. Total cost $700 billion plus. This is a major piece of legislation, and it kind of came out of the blue. There wasn't much reporting on these behind-the-scenes negotiations. In fact, the negotiations had kind of sputtered to a disappointing halt. And yet here, at what seems to be the 11th hour, as far as Democrats in the midterms are concerned, out they come with a bill. A, do you think it's going to pass? And B, what do you make of this process?
Yeah, the process has been messy, definitely not good for Democrats to have so much focus and attention on a process that, like you said, was started and stopped and rebooted and halted. I mean, that's often how deals are made in Washington. This one just took a long time, was incredibly painful for Democrats to have so much infighting. What's interesting is that early this summer, there was some reporting around a deal that was looking to be almost exactly this in size and scope, that was thought to be paid for by two big things, that like you said, the minimum corporate tax for for corporations that's included in this deal, and that provision that will allow Medicare to negotiate drug prices. That's actually something that will save the federal government so much money. So the idea is that, yes, it's big spending, but it has these two big money-making components to help offset the cost of the bill. But then Joe Manchin said he was walking away, that it had all fallen apart. What's interesting to me is that right around that same time, Senator McConnell, the Republican leader, had started to threaten whether Republicans would play ball in passing that semiconductor bill. We're getting really in the weeds of Washington, but this is how it works. And so then Joe Manchin said there wasn't a deal on reconciliation. All of a sudden, the Senate moves on the semiconductor bill. 24 hours later, Joe Manchin and Schumer announced they actually have a deal. It's interesting to me. I'm wondering if they kind of just played this well. They were able to both pass the semiconductor bill through the Senate, and now they're announcing they have a deal. These are two big things that Democrats wanted to get done.
All right, and it is fascinating, as you say. That's the way the sausage usually gets made in Washington. Confusingly, let's bring in ABC News senior White House correspondent Mary Bruce joining us now. Mary, how do you look at the president taking a victory lap on the agreement, the deal that was reached without his involvement?
Yeah, it is. Look, the president is trying to walk a fine line here in many ways, and I think that's what stands out really about these remarks. Yes, this is a huge victory for this president. Much of what was in this bill and much of what's in this deal was really the cornerstone of the president's agenda. These are huge priorities that he campaigned on. This lets him have a huge win, even though Joe Manchin, of course, is taking much of the credit, and Joe Biden himself was not involved in negotiations. And the White House argues that's part of the strategy, right? That the president knows when to give Congress a little bit of room, when to give them space to work this out on their own. But it is interesting how the president is trying to balance touting what this bill will do, which, you know, to sum it up, he said it will fight inflation, that this will help to ease some of the gut punch that American consumers are feeling right now. But he also has to be sensitive to the fact that Americans aren't feeling the impact of this, of course, yet. And Americans are, what they are feeling is an economy that really is hitting them hard. And so on one hand, he wants to tout this bill. He wants to get out there and claim this victory and seize that. But he also has to be sensitive to the latest economic numbers and trying not to tout it too much because, of course, Americans are feeling some real pain.
And Mary, I want to ask about the timing of all this. The Democrats have been in just this deep, pessimistic, almost fearful mood with the midterms looming and polls showing the Republicans way ahead on the congressional ballot. And yet here we have a series of victories, right? The CHIPS bill, which the president has signed, or has passed, I should say. Here you've got this major deal on climate and health care. It seems almost that they are trying to go to the voters with some real accomplishments.
They are, because they know they need to. They have to be able to go to voters ahead of the November midterms and say, look at what we've done. And they have to hope that Americans are feeling the impact of what they've done by then. That even if, you know, inflation isn't down, because of course it's at 40-year highs right now, but that Americans are starting to feel some relief, that at least if the trend is heading in the right direction, the voters will reward Democrats and reward this White House for it. But that's a huge challenge, right? It means that this president and this administration and Democrats have to get out and really sell this, right? You talk about the CHIPS legislation. Well, you know, you got to explain that to people, what this means and how it will impact them. And, you know, this White House has certainly been criticized in the past for not doing a good enough job of really sort of taking the wins and being able to claim their successes and getting credit for them. So the president today was the beginning of that. I think you're going to see him over the next several weeks and months getting out there and touting this much more and much more widely, because they know that they have to do that in order to get voters to see that they have been able to make good on some of their promises to the American people.
And Alexis, we're talking politics here, right? How does it impact the midterm elections and the president's standing and who did the deal? Let's talk about what this means for the economy. The Democrats are calling this and the Republicans who would support it, the Inflation Reduction Act, and that it'll help the economy. How do you think business community and Wall Street are going to react to this bill?
Look, at the end of the day, the Biden administration doesn't have a lot of tools to bring down inflation. We've seen what the president has tried to do with gas prices, tapping the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. That did little. And even Biden himself has admitted, look, it's the Federal Reserve that really has to pull out all the stops here to bring inflation down. And we're seeing them do that, handing us our 4th interest rate hike of the year yesterday. So they're really grasping at straws. One of those straws is health care, which was a big part of the bill that you're just talking about. Ironically, health care is one of the few things that has not been impacted by inflation, at least not right now. And that's because insurers and providers usually have to negotiate those healthcare costs way in advance. So they're sort of a lagging indicator of inflation. So it's interesting that certainly this bill would help in terms of Medicare, Medicaid, but right now, healthcare costs are not feeling the effects. And I do just want to mention one thing about inside that bill would be raising corporate taxes and raising the taxes on the wealthy. I'm going to play devil's advocate for a moment and say that if you start to raise taxes on corporations at a time when they're forced to spend more on wages and they too are paying more for just about everything, you are asking for those companies to start laying off workers, possibly.
Well, I guess the Democrats would say they're looking at those corporate profits and wanting the government to have a piece of them. And we'll see how that works out. Alexis Christoforous, Mary Bruce, Mary Alice Parks, thanks.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.